People in the valley didn't just avoid the ranch. They crossed the road when they came near it. They sped up. They looked away. And if you asked why, voices lowered, eyes shifted, and the same words always followed. Nothing good ever stays there. The land had sat untouched for nearly 40 years. Not because it was barren, but because it was alive in a way that unsettled people. The fence posts leaned like tired sentinels. The old barn groaned even on windless nights. And in the center of it all stood the horse. No one knew where he came from. They only knew he was always there. Dark-coated. Silent. He never ran when people approached. He never neighed. He simply stood, watching, his eyes fixed with an intensity that made grown men feel exposed. As if he remembered things they didn't want remembered. As if he was guarding something buried beneath the soil. The locals called him the Watcher. And for 40 years, he was the final reason no one stayed. The story usually began the same way. Someone desperate would buy the land cheap, too cheap to ignore. A man running from debt. A family chasing a fresh start. A couple convinced ghosts were just stories. They would move in. And then, the horse would change everything. Lights would flicker when the animals stared at the house. Dogs refused to cross the pasture. Tools went missing only to be found stacked neatly by the old oak near the barn. And always, the horse stood nearby, silent, unmoving, watching. Most owners left within months. Some lasted weeks. One lasted 3 days. After that, the ranch was abandoned for good. Until Caleb Rourke arrived. Caleb didn't come looking for ghosts. He came because he had nowhere else to go. At 43, he carried failure like a second spine. A busted career in construction. A marriage that collapsed under years of grief he never learned how to speak about. A teenage son he barely saw anymore. When the listing for the ranch appeared, cash only, no inspections, sold as is, Caleb didn't even ask why. He signed the papers without stepping foot on the land. When he finally drove through the rusted gate, the sun was already sinking, washing the valley in gold and shadow. The mountains rose in the distance, calm and indifferent. The barn loomed to the right, half swallowed by time. And then Caleb saw the horse. Standing just beyond the fence line. Still watching him. Caleb felt it immediately, a pressure behind the eyes. Not fear. Not exactly. Something heavier. Like stepping into a room where an argument had just ended, but no one would tell you what was said. The horse didn't move as Caleb shut off the engine. Didn't flinch when the truck door slammed. Didn't blink. "You're real," Caleb muttered, unsure why he felt the need to say it out loud. The horse's ears flicked forward. That was the only movement. That first night, Caleb slept in the truck. Not because he believed the stories, but because the house smelled wrong. Like memory trapped in wood. The wind carried sounds that didn't match the weather. Boards popped. The barn creaked. And sometime after midnight, Caleb woke with the strange certainty that someone, or something, was standing outside the truck. He didn't look. In the morning, he found hoofprints circling the vehicle. Perfectly spaced. Like a patrol. Over the next few days, Caleb tried to ignore the horse. He focused on repairs. Cleaned the well. Patched the fence. Hauled debris from the barn. Yet no matter where he worked, the horse was always within sight. Sometimes closer than should have been possible. Never touching. Never threatening. Just present. Caleb noticed other things too. Birds avoided the center pasture. The wind always shifted direction near the old oak. And the horse, he never grazed. He barely drank. He stood near the same stretch of ground every day, as if anchored to it. Locals refused to help. "Sell it," one man warned at the feed store. "That place don't want people." Caleb shrugged. Neither do most places. But at night, alone in the house, the silence pressed in. And sometimes, just sometimes, he thought he heard a second set of footsteps moving with his own. On the 5th evening, Caleb did something no one else had dared to do in decades. He crossed the fence. The horse lifted his head. For the first time, he moved. Not away. Toward Caleb. Slow. Measured. Each step deliberate, heavy with meaning. Caleb's heart hammered, not with fear, but with the feeling that something irreversible was happening. He stopped 10 feet away. The air between them felt charged. Caleb swallowed. "Easy, boy." The horse stared straight through him. And then, without warning, he turned and walked toward the oak tree. Stopped. Stamped once. The ground beneath the tree shuddered. Caleb felt it through his boots. And in that moment, standing in the fading light, Caleb understood something that chilled him deeper than any ghost story ever could. The horse wasn't haunting the ranch. He was guarding it. And whatever lay beneath that oak had waited 40 years to be found. If this story has already pulled you in, take a moment to like and subscribe. Caleb didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the horse's hooves striking the earth beneath the oak tree. Not violently. Purposefully. Like a signal. Like a warning that had been repeated for decades, ignored every single time. By dawn, the sky was pale and unsettled, streaked with gray clouds that moved too fast for the wind Caleb could feel. He brewed coffee he barely drank and stood on the porch, eyes locked on the pasture. The horse was already there. Same place. Same posture. Head lifted. Waiting. "All right," Caleb whispered, rubbing his face. "I get it. You want something." The horse didn't react. But Caleb felt it, an invisible tension easing just slightly, as if the land itself had heard him speak. Caleb fetched a shovel from the barn. The metal rang loudly in the quiet morning, echoing off the old beams. Dust fell like ash when he pulled the tool free. No one had dug here in years. Maybe decades. As he crossed the fence again, his pulse quickened. The horse watched every step, but didn't retreat. Instead, he shifted aside, giving Caleb a clear path to the oak tree. That alone sent a chill through him. "You're really going to let me do this?" Caleb muttered. The horse flicked an ear. Permission. The ground beneath the oak was harder than expected. Each strike of the shovel jarred Caleb's arms. The soil was packed tight, as if pressed down by time itself. Sweat ran down his spine despite the cool air. After several minutes, the shovel struck something solid. Clang. Caleb froze. He cleared dirt with his hands, heart thudding. Wood emerged, dark, aged, splintered at the edges. A lid. A box. Not a coffin, but close enough to make his breath hitch. Caleb leaned back on his heels, staring at it. "No," he whispered. "No way." Behind him, the horse exhaled loudly. A sound that felt like relief. Caleb pried the lid open. Inside were weathered leather straps. Rusted metal. A folded blanket. And beneath it all, a bundle of old papers wrapped in oilcloth. Letters. Dozens of them. The handwriting was neat, careful. Dates stamped across the top told a story that made Caleb's throat tighten. 41 years ago. The year the ranch was first abandoned. Caleb sat on the ground, reading. The letters belonged to Elias Crow, the original owner of the ranch. A horse breeder. A quiet man, according to the town records Caleb later checked. Known for working alone. Known for one exceptional stallion. The same horse. Elias's letters weren't addressed to a person. They were written to the horse. "You're the only one who listens. They don't understand you like I do. If anything happens to me, stay." Caleb's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Elias wrote of pressure from developers. Of men offering money he refused. Of threats disguised as kindness. Of fear he never voiced out loud, except here, beneath the oak. The final letter ended abruptly. "If they come tonight, I won't fight. But I won't leave you. Guard this place. Guard the truth." There was no signature. Just a smear at the bottom of the page that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Caleb staggered back from the pit, heart racing. "That's why," he whispered. "That's why you stayed." The horse stepped forward, lowering his head toward the open box. For the first time, Caleb saw it clearly. A scar along the horse's shoulder. The kind left by a blade, not wire or rock. Someone had tried to remove him. And paid for it. The town sheriff didn't believe Caleb at first. Neither did the historian. But records had gaps. Reports filed and quietly closed. A missing person case that was never fully investigated. The land sold and resold without explanation. And always, the horse remained. When officials finally came to the ranch, The air felt different. Lighter. As if the land had been holding its breath for decades. They found more beneath the oak. Both human. Elias Crow had never left his ranch. He'd been buried where he stood. That night, Caleb sat on the fence as the sun bled into the horizon. The horse stood beside him, closer than ever before. Not guarding now. Watching. Waiting. Caleb felt a strange warmth in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt since before his life had fallen apart. "You trusted me," he said quietly. "Didn't you?" The horse turned his head slightly, dark eye reflecting the fire of the sky. And for the first time since Caleb arrived, the horse neighed. A sound that carried both grief and release. But the story wasn't over. Because truth doesn't just free the dead. It tests the living. And when word spread about what Caleb had uncovered, people started coming back to the ranch. Not all of them with good intentions. Some wanted justice. Others wanted the land. And a few wanted to silence the past, again. The horse sensed it before Caleb did. He grew restless. Protective. Standing between Caleb and strangers. Blocking paths. Staring down anyone who came too close to the oak. The watcher was no longer guarding a secret. He was guarding Caleb. And that bond, fragile, unspoken, powerful, was about to be pushed to its breaking point. The first truck arrived just after sunrise. Caleb noticed it from the porch, black, polished, wrong against the dust and quiet of the valley. It rolled through the rusted gate like it had every right to be there. The horse noticed it before the engine noise reached the house. He lifted his head sharply. Ears pinned. Body squared toward the road. Caleb felt it then, the shift. The same pressure he'd felt his first night, but heavier now. The ranch wasn't holding its breath anymore. It was bracing. 2 men stepped out of the truck. Clean boots. Clean hands. Smiles that never reached their eyes. They looked around like buyers inspecting merchandise, not men stepping onto land soaked with history. "Caleb Rourke?" one called. Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched the horse move, slowly, deliberately, placing himself between the men and the oak tree. Protective. "Can I help you?" Caleb finally said. The taller man smiled wider. "We're with a development group. Word is this place just got interesting." Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's not for sale." The shorter man chuckled. "Everything's for sale." The horse stamped once. The men flinched despite themselves. They left after 10 minutes, but not before leaving a card on the fence post. Caleb crushed it in his fist the moment they were gone. He turned to the horse. "They won't stop," he said quietly. The horse exhaled through his nostrils, long and steady. As if to say, "I know." Over the next week, more people came. Some brought flowers. Some brought cameras. A few brought questions that cut too close to old wounds. Caleb answered what he could. The truth mattered, but it came at a cost. Nights grew restless. The horse paced. Caleb slept lightly, always half awake, always listening. And then the threat started. Notes left on the fence. Anonymous calls warning him to walk away. Promises that what happened to Elias Crow didn't have to happen again. Caleb didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. The horse already knew. One night, the storm came without warning. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the windows. Rain slammed into the roof like thrown gravel. Caleb was halfway down the hall when the sound reached him. A scream. Not human. Caleb grabbed a flashlight and ran. The pasture was chaos. Rain, mud, wind twisting the grass flat. The beam of the flashlight caught movement near the barn. Shadows darting. Too many. Caleb's heart dropped. "Hey!" he shouted. "Get away from him." 3 figures scattered. And then Caleb saw the horse. On the ground. One leg twisted beneath him. Bleeding. Caleb dropped beside him, rain soaking them both. The horse's sides heaved, eyes wide, not with fear, but fury. Someone had tried to move him. Drag him. Force him away from the oak. They had failed. But not without damage. "I'm here," Caleb whispered, hands shaking as he pressed against the wound. "I've got you." The horse struggled to rise, even injured, placing himself between Caleb and the darkness beyond the flashlight's reach. Still guarding. Still choosing. The vet arrived hours later, soaked and silent. The verdict was careful but grim. "He can heal," she said. "But only if he rests. Stress could kill him." Caleb nodded, throat tight. When the vet left, Caleb stayed with the horse through the night, rain finally easing into mist. At some point, exhaustion took him. He dreamed of Elias Crow. Not as a ghost, but as a man standing beneath the oak, hand resting on the horse's neck. "Don't let them take him," Elias said. "He's not just a horse." By morning, Caleb had made his decision. He filed for emergency protection on the land. Worked with investigators. Exposed every document, every name tied to the threats and the old cover-up. He spoke to the press. Told the story even when his voice shook. And through it all, the horse watched. Learning. Trusting. Weeks passed. The ranch grew quieter again, but different now. Cleaner. Honest. The oak stood undisturbed, marked and protected. Flowers bloomed at its base. The horse healed slowly. Caleb slept in the barn those nights, close enough to hear every breath. And one evening as the sun dipped low, Caleb did something he'd never done before. He reached out. The horse tensed, just slightly. Caleb stopped. Waited. "Your choice," he murmured. Seconds passed. Then the horse leaned in. Just enough. Caleb's hand met warm hide. Solid. Not a ghost. Not a guardian. A living being choosing trust after 40 years of loss. Caleb laughed, the sound breaking out of him like something he'd been holding back his whole life. The next morning, a boy stood at the fence. 14. Thin. Nervous. Eyes too old for his face. Caleb recognized that look. "You the guy with the horse?" the boy asked. Caleb nodded. "They say he saved you." Caleb glanced at the pasture, where the horse stood in the sunlight, no longer guarding, just existing. "No," Caleb said softly. "He saved himself." The boy smiled. And for the first time, Caleb saw the future stretching forward instead of closing in. But the final test was still coming. Because some wounds don't close quietly. And some bonds demand one last act of courage. The injunction came through on a Tuesday morning. Caleb read the email twice, then a third time, just to be sure his eyes weren't lying to him. The ranch was now officially protected as a historical site. Development was frozen. Investigations were ongoing. For the first time in 40 years, the land wasn't vulnerable. Caleb should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt uneasy. The horse hadn't moved from the oak since sunrise. Something was wrong. Caleb noticed it in the way the horse stood, head low, weight shifted carefully, eyes not scanning the horizon but fixed inward, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. The air around the oak felt heavy again, thick with memory. Caleb approached slowly. "You don't have to guard it anymore," he said gently. "It's safe." The horse didn't respond. His ears flicked once, backward. Refusing. That night, Caleb dreamed again. This time, Elias Crow wasn't standing. He was kneeling, hands in the dirt beneath the oak, face twisted with pain and urgency. "He's done his part," Elias said. "Now you must do yours." Caleb woke with a gasp, heart pounding. Outside, the horse neighed. A sound that cut through the dark like a farewell. Caleb ran. The pasture was empty. The oak stood alone. Panic surged through him as he followed hoofprints leading away from the tree, away from the ranch, toward the old trail that vanished into the hills. The prints were fresh. The horse had never left before. Not once in 40 years. Caleb grabbed his jacket and truck keys. "Don't," he whispered to the empty air. "Don't do this alone." The trail climbed steeply, winding through rock and brush. Caleb's truck couldn't go farther, so he ran the rest of the way, lungs burning, heart hammering with a fear he couldn't name. He found the horse at the ridge, standing at the edge of the valley. Looking back, the wind whipped his mane, moonlight silvering his dark coat. For a moment, Caleb saw not a guardian or a survivor, but a prisoner standing at the door of his cell. "You can leave," Caleb said, breathless. "You've earned that." The horse turned his head slightly, eyes reflecting the stars. And then he stepped away from the oak's shadow for the final time. The ground beneath the ridge trembled. Not violently. Gently. Like something settling. Caleb felt it in his bones, the way you feel an ending before you understand it. The wind shifted. The pressure lifted. The ranch, miles away, felt suddenly lighter, freer. The curse, if that's what it had been, was gone. The horse took a few steps down the trail. Then stopped. Looked back again. Caleb approached slowly, heart in his throat. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Go." The horse exhaled. Then, unexpectedly, he turned and walked back toward Caleb. Not past him. To him. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead gently against Caleb's chest. The contact stole the breath from Caleb's lungs. This wasn't duty. This wasn't guarding. This was choice. They returned to the ranch together at dawn. The oak looked different now. Just a tree. No weight. No warning. Flowers stirred softly in the breeze. The horse grazed for the first time. Caleb sat on the fence and cried without shame. Weeks later, the ranch opened its gates again, not for profit, but for healing. Veterans. People who carried grief they didn't know how to name. The horse never performed tricks. Never carried a saddle. He simply stood with people. Listened. And somehow, that was enough. Caleb found his son there one afternoon, brushing the horse's mane, laughing in a way Caleb hadn't heard in years. "You staying?" his son asked. Caleb looked at the land, the horse, the future unfolding quietly. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." But one final chapter remained. Not for the land. Not for Caleb. But for the man whose bones had waited 40 years to be named. If this story has moved you, like and subscribe. The ceremony was small. That's what Caleb wanted. What felt right. No crowds. No cameras. Just the people who needed to be there, and the horse, standing quietly beneath the oak tree that no longer felt heavy, only old. The marker was simple stone. Elias Crow. Beloved horseman. Protector. Remembered. As the final words were spoken, a breeze moved through the pasture. Gentle. Not the restless wind of before, but something peaceful, like a hand passing over the land, smoothing it flat. The horse lifted his head. And for the first time since Caleb had known him, the watcher walked away from the oak without looking back. That was when Caleb understood. The horse had never been waiting for justice. He had been waiting for acknowledgement. To be seen. To be believed. To have the truth spoken out loud. 40 years of silence didn't end with anger. It ended with a name. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The barn was repaired, not to erase its age, but to honor it. The pasture filled with the quiet sounds of healing, footsteps, laughter, brushing, shared stories. The horse became known by a new name now. Crow. Caleb never announced it. It just happened. A child asked one day, "Is that his name?" Caleb had looked at the horse, who flicked an ear like he was listening. "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "I think it is." Crow never left the ranch, but he no longer guarded it. He wandered. He grazed. He chose his company. And the strangest thing of all? The haunted feeling never returned. Not once. No shadows. No whispers. No pressure in the air. Just land being land again. One evening, long after the visitors had gone, Caleb stood at the fence watching the sunset bleed gold into the valley. Crow stood beside him, shoulder brushing his arm. "You know," Caleb said, "I came here running from my life." Crow shifted his weight, listening. "I thought I was buying a mistake. Turns out I was being given a second chance." Caleb reached out, resting his hand on Crow's neck. This time, there was no hesitation on either side. Caleb's son started coming every weekend. Then every day. He didn't talk much at first. Just brushed the horse. Walked the fence. Sat quietly under the oak. One afternoon he finally said, "He listens better than people." Caleb smiled. "Yeah. He always has." Years passed. The story of the haunted ranch faded into something else. A legend, yes, but not a frightening one. A story about loyalty. About memory. About how some bonds don't break even when time does its worst. And always there was the horse. Older now. Slower. Still watchful, but no longer burdened. On a cool autumn morning, Crow didn't come to the fence. Caleb knew before he reached the pasture. The horse lay beneath the oak, legs folded neatly, eyes closed. No struggle. No fear. Just rest. Caleb knelt beside him, pressing his forehead to Crow's. "Thank you," he whispered. "For staying. For trusting me." The wind moved softly through the grass. For a moment, just a moment, Caleb thought he saw another figure standing nearby. A man in work-worn clothes, hand resting on a familiar neck. Then the light shifted, and the pasture was empty but peaceful. Crow was buried beneath the oak, where he had chosen to stand for 40 years. Not as a guardian, not as a ghost, but as a horse who loved a man enough to remember him when the world forgot.